The chandeliers above the Grand Royal Ballroom in Nairobi blazed like 1,000 suns, but all I could see was my wife's face as she leaned close to my ear and whispered the words that would shatter everything. "Kwame, stay in the back. Don't embarrass me tonight." Her perfume was expensive, her dress cost more than my father's funeral, and her eyes, those eyes I once loved, looked at me like I was something dirty she'd stepped in. I stood there in my borrowed suit, the fabric scratching against my neck, watching her glide toward the stage where photographers waited. And in that moment I made a decision that would destroy us both. I turned. I walked. And I took something with me that she would spend the rest of her life trying to find. Which city are you watching this video from? Comment your city name below. I want to know where my family is watching from tonight because this story is going to leave a mark on your heart that won't fade easily. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Stories like this, real stories about real pain and the choices we make when we're pushed too far, they need to be heard. So hit that subscribe button because you're about to witness something that will make you question everything you thought you knew about love, pride, and revenge. My name is Kwame Osei, and 6 years ago I was a different man. I taught literature at a small secondary school in Kisumu, earning barely enough to feed myself, let alone dream of the life Thandai promised me when she said yes to my proposal under the jacaranda tree in her father's compound. Back then she loved my poetry. She loved the way I spoke about Achebe and Soyinka, the way I could make words dance. Her father, Baba Musyoka, was a wealthy businessman who owned half the commercial district in Mombasa. He didn't approve, but Thandai was stubborn. "I don't need his money," she told me, her fingers intertwined with mine. "I need you." We married in a small ceremony in Eldoret, just us and a few friends. No fancy hall, no expensive photographers. Just love. Or so I thought. The first 2 years were hard but honest. We lived in a 2-room apartment where the walls were so thin you could hear the neighbors arguing about ugali portions. Thandai worked as a receptionist at a hotel, and I taught my classes, staying late to tutor students who couldn't afford extra lessons. We were poor, yes, but we had each other. At night, we'd lie on our worn mattress and dream about the future. She wanted to start a business. I wanted to write a novel. We were building something. Then Baba Musyoka got sick. Cancer. The aggressive kind that eats you from the inside out. Thandai rushed to Mombasa every weekend, and I went with her when I could afford the bus fare. I watched her father waste away in that massive house with its marble floors and empty rooms, watched him look at me with those dying eyes that still held contempt. "You're not enough for her," he whispered once when Thandai left the room. "You'll never be enough." I said nothing. What could I say? He was dying and maybe he was right. When Baba Musyoka died, he left everything to Thandai. Everything. The properties, the businesses, the investments, the cash, millions of shillings that transformed our lives overnight. We moved to Nairobi, to a house in Karen that had more bathrooms than our old apartment had rooms. Thandai hired a lawyer, an accountant, a business manager. She became someone else almost immediately, like she'd been waiting her whole life to shed the skin of the poor girl who loved a poor teacher. "You should quit teaching," she said one evening as we sat in our new dining room that could seat 20 people. "It's embarrassing. You're my husband. People will talk." "Teaching is who I am," I replied, my fork frozen over a plate of food I didn't recognize, prepared by a cook whose name I kept forgetting. "No, Kwame. Teaching is who you were. This," she gestured at the house, at everything, "this is who we are now." But I kept teaching. It was the only thing that still felt real. My students in Kibera, where I transferred to be closer to Nairobi, they reminded me of who I used to be. They reminded me that not everything could be bought. Thandai hated it. She started attending charity galas, business conferences, social events where wealthy Kenyans gathered to see and be seen. At first she'd ask me to come. Then she stopped asking. Then she started asking me not to come. "You don't fit in," she said once, not even looking up from her phone. "You make things awkward." I should have left then. But I loved her. Or I loved the memory of who she used to be. And maybe, somewhere deep in my foolish heart, I thought she'd come back to me. That the woman who cried reading my poems would remember that money can't buy the things that actually matter. I was wrong. The night of the charity gala at the Grand Royal was supposed to be her biggest moment yet. She was being honored as one of Nairobi's top young entrepreneurs, a recognition that came with press coverage and connections to even wealthier circles. She'd had my suit tailored, told me exactly how to behave, rehearsed small talk topics I should avoid. I was to be a prop, a silent accessory to her success story. "Just smile and stay quiet," she instructed as our driver navigated through traffic. "And for God's sake, don't mention teaching or Kisumu or any of that." When we arrived at the ballroom, the difference between us had never been clearer. She glowed in her designer gown, confident and radiant, while I felt like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. Wealthy men and women air-kissed her cheeks, complimented her success, asked about her investments. When they glanced at me, their eyes glazed over, already moving to the next interesting thing. That's when she leaned in and whispered those words. "Kwame, stay in the back. Don't embarrass me tonight." Something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked. Like a windshield hit by a stone, spiderwebbing out from a single point of impact. I watched her walk away, watched her laugh with people who didn't know she used to steal leftover chapati from the hotel kitchen where she worked because we couldn't afford lunch. And I realized something terrible and true. I didn't know this woman anymore. And she didn't want to know me. So I walked. Past the champagne fountains, past the ice sculptures shaped like the Kenyan flag, past the string quartet playing classical music that nobody was really listening to. I walked toward the back of the ballroom, toward the service entrance where the real people worked. The waiters, the cleaners, the ones who made everything look effortless for those who could afford not to notice. What I expected: speech notes, business cards, maybe some contracts she'd been reviewing. What I found: the architecture of betrayal laid out in neat folders and labeled documents. The first folder contained bank statements. Not the joint account she'd shown me, the one we supposedly shared. These were private accounts, opened in her name only, containing amounts that made my throat tight. 17 million shillings in one account. 23 million in another. Property deeds for buildings in Mombasa I'd never heard of. Investment portfolios worth more than I'd earn in 5 lifetimes of teaching. But it was the second folder that made my hands stop shaking and start burning. Legal documents. A petition for divorce, already drafted, dated 3 weeks ago. Grounds: irreconcilable differences and abandonment of marital duties. My name was spelled correctly. My teaching salary was listed in a section highlighting financial inequality and incompatibility. There was a settlement offer, 50,000 shillings, and a requirement that I vacate the marital home within 30 days. 50,000. For 6 years of my life. For loving her when she had nothing. For staying with her when she became someone I didn't recognize. I read it 3 times, each word a small knife. The lawyer's name at the bottom was McKenna and George, one of the women I'd seen her laughing with at previous events. This had been planned. Carefully. Strategically. While I taught irregular verbs to teenagers in Kibra, while I came home to a wife who barely looked at me, she'd been building the legal framework to erase me from her life. But there was more. A third folder, thinner than the others, marked private correspondence. Inside, printed emails. The first few were business-related, discussions of property acquisitions and investment strategies. Then they changed. Messages to a man named Jelani Adeyemi, a Nigerian businessman she'd met at a conference in Lagos 6 months ago. The early emails were professional, then friendly, then flirtatious, then explicit. I read them all. Every word of affection she'd stopped giving me. Every promise of a future that didn't include a poor teacher from Kisumu. Plans for a trip to Zanzibar. Photos I couldn't bear to look at for more than a second. The most recent email was from 2 days ago. After the gala, I'll tell him. I'm done pretending. We can finally be together properly. I sat there in that small room, the sounds of Kibra filtering through the thin walls. Someone's radio playing Benga music, children shouting as they chased a makeshift football, a woman calling her family for dinner. Real sounds. Real lives. And I held in my hands the evidence of how completely I'd been removed from my own life. My phone buzzed. Thandao. 15 missed calls. Where are you? Everyone is asking about you. This is so embarrassing. Embarrassing. That word again. I was the embarrassment. Not her lies, not her secret accounts, not her affair with a man whose cologne probably cost more than my monthly salary. Me. The man who loved her when she was nobody, who held her when she cried about her father's disappointment, who promised her we'd build something beautiful together. If you took my portfolio, bring it back now. Kwame, I'm serious. So she'd noticed. Of course she had. In that portfolio was everything, her secrets, her plans, her escape route. Without it, she was exposed. I turned off my phone. I needed to think. But thinking required a kind of clarity I didn't have. Instead, I had rage bubbling up from somewhere deep, somewhere I didn't know existed inside me. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold kind. The calculating kind. The kind that makes you understand why people do terrible things. I'd spent 6 years being invisible. Being tolerated. Being the mistake she couldn't quite erase. And now, holding this portfolio, I had something she needed. something she'd built her entire future around. The irony wasn't lost on me. The thing she valued most wasn't the man she married, but the papers documenting how she'd unmake that marriage. Outside my window, Nairobi's night hummed with life. Somewhere in Karen, Thandai was probably panicking, calculating what I might do, what I might have seen. Somewhere in Lagos, Jelani Adeyemi was probably asleep, unaware that the woman he'd been planning a future with was about to have her carefully constructed world collapse. And somewhere inside me, the man who wrote love poems and believed in forever was dying. What was being born in his place I didn't yet know. But I could feel it growing, cold and patient and utterly unforgiving. I would not give the portfolio back. Not tomorrow, not next week, not ever. But I wouldn't destroy it either. That would be too simple, too clean. No, I would do something worse. Something that would hurt the way I hurt. Something that would make her understand what it feels like to be erased while you're still breathing. I just needed to figure out what that something was. Morning came with the sound of Mzee Omandi opening his hardware shop below, metal shutters rattling up as the first customers arrived. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the entire night reading through every document in that portfolio, memorizing account numbers, transaction dates, names of business partners, details of deals that would make a tax investigator very interested. Thandai had been careful but not careful enough. When you think you're invincible, you make mistakes. My phone, still off, felt like a bomb in my pocket. I knew what would be waiting when I turned it on. Messages, calls, maybe even threats. But I wasn't ready yet. First, I needed to understand the full scope of what I was holding. By sunrise, I had my answer. Thandai hadn't just hidden money from me. She'd been systematically moving assets, restructuring her father's businesses, and, here's where it got interesting, avoiding taxes through a series of shell companies and offshore accounts. Some of the properties were listed under false names. Some of the transactions bore forged signatures. It wasn't just betrayal. It was fraud. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt sick. Because this meant the woman I'd loved, the woman who used to recite Wole Soyinka while we cooked githeri in our tiny kitchen, had become the kind of person who could look at poor people from her car window and feel nothing. The kind of person who could steal, lie, and cheat her way to more money than she could ever spend, all while telling her husband he was the embarrassment. At 8 in the morning, I turned on my phone. It exploded with notifications. 63 missed calls. 48 text messages. 3 voicemails. I listened to the voicemails first. The first, from last night, was anger. Kwame, what the hell are you playing at? Bring my portfolio back right now or I swear to God. The second, from 3 in the morning, was fear. Please, Kwame. We can talk about this. Whatever you're thinking, we can work it out. Just bring it back. Please. The third, from an hour ago, was rage again but sharper. You stupid man. You have no idea what you've done. When I find you, and I will find you, you're going to regret this. That portfolio is mine. Everything in it is mine. You're nothing, Kwame. You've always been nothing. There it was. The truth she'd been hiding behind her charity smiles and public grace. I was nothing. Had always been nothing. The 6 years we'd spent together, the promises we'd made, the life we'd built, none of it mattered because I didn't have enough zeros in my bank account. I texted her back. Just 4 words, we need to talk. The response came in seconds. Where are you? Meet me at Karura Forest. The main entrance. No. Come alone. Kwame, don't be stupid. Give me my portfolio. No. Alone. Or I start making phone calls. I didn't specify what kind of phone calls. I didn't need to. She was smart enough to imagine the Kenya Revenue Authority, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, maybe even journalists who'd love a story about a rising entrepreneur with dirty hands. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, fine. No. But this better be worth it. Worth it. As if this was a business negotiation. As if we were strangers haggling over the price of second-hand furniture instead of 2 people whose marriage had rotted from the inside out. I spent the morning walking through Kibera, the portfolio in a backpack I'd borrowed from Mzee Omandi. Children ran past me, dodging puddles from last night's rain. Women sold mandatsi and mahindi choma from small stalls, calling out prices to passers-by. Men sat in plastic chairs outside barber shops, discussing politics and football with the kind of passion that comes from having nothing to lose. This was real. This was life without pretense. Nobody here cared about galas or designer gowns or business awards. They cared about surviving another day, about keeping their families fed, about small moments of joy in the midst of struggle. I taught at the secondary school here for 3 years, and my students, brilliant kids with dreams bigger than their circumstances, had taught me more than I'd ever taught them. They taught me that dignity isn't something you can buy. That poverty doesn't make you less human. That the richest person in the room is often the one with the most debt to their own soul. Thandai had forgotten that. Or maybe she'd never known it. Maybe growing up with Baba Musioka's money had always made her believe that wealth was virtue, that success was morality, that being powerful meant being right. At 11:30, I took a matatu to Karura Forest. The morning traffic was brutal, cars jammed bumper to bumper, exhaust fumes mixing with the smell of roadside roasted maize. I sat by the window watching Nairobi scroll past, the contrast between gleaming office towers and corrugated iron shacks, between women in business suits and women balancing water jerrycans on their heads, between the Kenya we showed tourists and the Kenya we lived in. Thandai was already there when I arrived, leaning against her silver Mercedes, her arms crossed. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, no makeup, her hair pulled back. She looked tired. Good. I hope she hadn't slept either. You have some nerve, she said as I approached, her voice low and dangerous. Do you have any idea what you've put me through? The questions, the rumors, people thinking I can't even control my own husband. Control? I interrupted, stopping a few meters away. Is that what you think marriage is? Control? Don't play games with me, Kwame. Give me the portfolio. I read everything, I said quietly. The accounts. The divorce papers. The emails to Jelani. Her face went pale, then flushed with anger. You had no right. No right. My voice cracked. No right to read documents about my own marriage? About the woman planning to erase me from her life like I never existed? You don't understand? Then explain it to me, Thandai. Explain how 50,000 shillings is a fair price for 6 years. Explain how you can hide millions while I teach children in Kibera for a salary that barely covers transport. Explain how you can plan a future with another man while telling me to stay in the back and not embarrass you. She looked away, her jaw tight. Things changed, Kwame. We changed. You can't expect everything to stay the same just because you're comfortable being small. Small? The word hit me like a fist. Loving you was the biggest thing I ever did. Building a life with you, even when we had nothing, was the bravest thing I've ever done. But you see it as being small because I don't measure success in millions. What do you want? She asked, her voice cold now, businesslike. Money? Is that what this is about? You want a bigger settlement? Fine. Name your price. And there it was. Everything reduced to a transaction. Our love, our history, our pain, all of it just numbers on a ledger, problems to be solved with the right payment. I don't want your money, I said, and I meant it. I want you to understand what you've become. I want you to look at yourself and see the woman who values her portfolio more than her marriage. The woman who commits fraud while receiving awards for entrepreneurship. The woman who became exactly what her father was, cruel, calculating, and convinced that wealth makes her better than everyone else. Her eyes flashed with rage. Don't you dare talk about my father. He built everything from nothing, and you inherited it. You didn't build anything, Thandai. You just learned how to steal in more expensive ways. She stepped toward me, her hand outstretched. Give me the portfolio. No. Or I'll call the police and report you for theft. Go ahead, I said calmly. Call them. And I'll make sure the police know exactly what's in here. Every illegal transaction. Every forged document. Every shilling you've hidden from the government. You think you're untouchable? You think your money and your connections will protect you from tax evasion and fraud charges? She stopped, her hand frozen in midair. For the first time since I'd known her, Thandai looked genuinely afraid. What do you want from me? She whispered. That was the question, wasn't it? What did I want? Revenge? Justice? An apology that would mean nothing because it came too late? I looked at this woman I'd once loved more than life itself, and I realized something that made my chest ache. I wanted her to be who she used to be. I wanted the girl who cried reading poetry, who believed love was stronger than money, who promised we'd face everything together. But that girl was dead. And I couldn't resurrect her no matter how much evidence I held in my hands. I want you to know, I said finally, that you lost something more valuable than anything in this portfolio. You lost yourself. And no amount of money will ever buy that back. We stood there in the parking lot of Karura Forest, separated by 3 meters and 6 years of accumulated lies. Around us, families unpacked picnics from their cars, joggers stretched before hitting the trails, children squealed with excitement at the prospect of seeing monkeys. Normal people doing normal things. We were not normal people anymore. We were two strangers wearing the skin of a failed marriage, negotiating the terms of our mutual destruction. You think you're so noble, Thandao said, her voice shaking now, whether from anger or fear I couldn't tell. You think because you teach poor children and live like a saint, that makes you better than me. But you know what, Kwame? You're just as selfish as anyone else. You kept me small. You wanted me to stay that receptionist girl who needed you, who depended on you, who made you feel like some kind of savior. When I got my inheritance and finally had the chance to become something more, you couldn't handle it. You wanted me to stay poor just so you could keep feeling superior. Her words were bullets and some of them hit their mark. Was there truth in what she said? Had I resented her success? Had I wanted to keep her in the same small world where I felt safe and needed? Maybe, I admitted, surprising us both. Maybe I did want things to stay the same. Because what we had, when it was just us against the world, that was real. What you became when money entered the picture, that's not real, Thandao. That's a performance. You're playing a role in someone else's story, and you don't even see it. At least I'm living, she shot back. At least I'm not hiding behind noble poverty and pretending that struggling is somehow more virtuous than succeeding. My father spent his whole life building something, and I'm not going to apologize for wanting to protect it and grow it. Protect it? You're stealing from it. You're committing fraud with it. You're using your father's legacy as a cover for your own greed. She flinched. For a moment, just a moment, I saw guilt flicker across her face. Then it hardened again into defiance. What I do with my money is my business. You have no claim to it. We're not even really married anymore, haven't been for years. Then why not just file for divorce? Why the secrecy? Why the 50,000 shilling insult? Because, she stopped, looked away. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Because I didn't want you to fight it. I didn't want a long, messy divorce where you'd try to claim half of everything. I thought if I offered you something small, if I made it quick and easy, you'd just go away. Go away, I repeated. Like garbage. Like something to be disposed of efficiently. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. I was an inconvenience. A reminder of a life you wanted to forget. And the fastest way to erase me was to pay me off and move on to Jelani. At the mention of his name, her face went red. Jelani has nothing to do with this. Jelani has everything to do with this, I said. He's who you want to be with. Fine. I can accept that people fall out of love. People change. Marriages end. But you didn't have the courage to just tell me the truth. You had to humiliate me, isolate me, make me feel like I was the problem for not transforming into the kind of wealthy, sophisticated husband who'd fit into your new world. You had to punish me for being the man you chose when you had nothing. Tears welled up in her eyes. I'd seen her cry many times over the years, but this was different. These weren't the soft tears of sadness or the fierce tears of frustration. These were tears of recognition. The kind that come when you finally see yourself clearly and don't like what you see. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I didn't know how to tell you that I'd outgrown us. Outgrown us. As if our marriage was a childhood toy she'd aged out of, something to be packed away in an attic and forgotten. You could have talked to me, I said, my own voice breaking now. Any point in the last 3 years you could have sat down with me and said, Kwame, this isn't working. I've changed. My needs have changed. Let's figure out how to end this with dignity. I would have been devastated, but I would have understood. Instead, you made me live in a house where I was a ghost. You made me come to events where you treated me like a servant. You made me feel invisible while you planned my erasure. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smudging mascara she'd probably put on this morning without thinking about it. What do you want me to say? I'm sorry? Would that fix anything? No, I admitted. Nothing can fix this. But I want you to understand the choice you're making right now. This portfolio, I patted the backpack, contains evidence of serious crimes. If I turn this over to the authorities, your life as you know it ends. You'll face investigations, trials, probably prison. Everything your father built, everything you've built, it all collapses. But more than that, you'll become the story everyone tells at those galas you love so much. The cautionary tale about greed and pride. She stared at me, her face pale. So you want to destroy me? That's what this is about. Revenge. No, I said, and the clarity of it surprised me. I don't want to destroy you. I want you to save yourself. I want you to choose right now between the person you've become and the person you could still be. I don't understand. Here's my offer, I said, pulling the backpack off my shoulders and holding it between us. You can have this back. All of it. The bank statements, the divorce papers, the emails, everything. I'll walk away from this marriage with nothing, just like you planned. I'll sign whatever papers you want. I'll disappear from your life completely. Hope flickered in her eyes. And what's the condition? You stop. You stop the fraud. You pay every shilling you owe in taxes. You restructure your businesses legally. You come clean about the shell companies and the hidden accounts. You become the entrepreneur you're pretending to be, someone who builds wealth honestly, not someone who steals it. She shook her head immediately. That's impossible. The penalties alone would bankrupt me. The investigations would take years. My reputation would be compromised. I finished. Yes, you'd lose some money, face some embarrassment, have to work harder to rebuild. But you'd keep your freedom. You'd keep your soul if there's any left. And maybe someday you'd be able to look at yourself in the mirror without flinching. And if I refuse? Then I make copies of everything in this portfolio. I send them to the Kenya Revenue Authority, the ACC, and 3 different journalists I've already researched. Your life becomes a very public disaster. You'll probably go to prison. Jelani will probably run back to Lagos. And everything you've worked for, stolen for, will be gone. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of irreversible choices. A monkey screeched somewhere in the forest behind us, and a car alarm went off in the distance. Life continuing, indifferent to our small tragedy. You're asking me to destroy myself, she finally said. I'm asking you to save yourself, I corrected. There's a difference. One path leads to slow redemption. The other leads to fast destruction. Your choice. She looked at the backpack, then at me, then back at the backpack. I could see her mind working, calculating odds, weighing options, trying to find some angle I hadn't considered. This was who she'd become. Someone who couldn't even accept grace without suspecting a trap. I need time, she said. You have 30 seconds. Kwame. 25 seconds. Every moment you wait, I get closer to making those phone calls. Every moment you hesitate, you're choosing the easy corruption over the hard redemption. This isn't fair. Life isn't fair, Thandile. You taught me that when you told me to stay in the back so I wouldn't embarrass you. 15 seconds. She closed her eyes, her hands clenched into fists. I wondered what she was seeing behind those eyelids, the prison cell waiting for her, or the person she used to be, or the future with Jelani that would never exist, or maybe just the bottomless hunger for more that had driven her to this moment. 10 seconds. Stop counting, she said, her voice barely audible. Make a choice. She opened her eyes and looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine emotion, unfiltered and raw. I choose. I choose to do it right, Thandile whispered, and in those 5 words, I heard the woman I'd once loved, buried under years of ambition and compromise, trying to claw her way back to the surface. But I'd learned something important in those sleepless hours studying her documents. Words were cheap. Action was expensive. Then prove it, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. Right now. We go together to see a lawyer, not McKenna, a real lawyer who specializes in tax law and corporate fraud. We tell them everything. We start the process of making things right. Today. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. She looked stricken. Kwame, I need time to prepare, to organize. Time to hide more evidence? Time to move more money? Time to rehearse a story that makes you look less guilty? I shook my head. No. Either we do this now or I walk away and make those phone calls. Those are the only 2 options left. The tears came harder now, and these weren't strategic or manipulative. These were the tears of someone finally confronting the consequences of their choices. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay, to be the husband who'd held her through every crisis. But I couldn't. That man was gone. What remained was someone harder, someone who'd learned that love without respect is just another form of abuse. I'm scared, she said through her hands, her voice breaking. I'm so scared, Kwame. Good, I replied. Fear is appropriate. Fear might save you. She lowered her hands and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. Will you stay with me through this? Through whatever comes. And there it was, the question I'd been dreading because I already knew the answer, and knowing it made everything final. No, I said gently. You'll do this alone. Well, not completely alone, you'll have lawyers, accountants, maybe family. But I won't be there. This is your journey now, not ours. But why? If I'm doing what you asked. Because staying would mean I forgive you. And I don't. Maybe I will someday, but not today. Today, I just need you to do the right thing, not because I'm watching, but because it's right. She nodded slowly, understanding finally settling over her like a heavy blanket. What happens to us? We end, I said simply. Honestly this time. No more games, no more pretending. You file for divorce properly. We split things fairly, and by fairly I mean I take nothing but my books and my dignity. You keep your money but you earn it honestly from now on. And the portfolio? I handed her the backpack. She took it with trembling hands, holding it like it might explode. When you've met with the lawyer, when you've started the process of coming clean, send me proof. Email me copies of the documents showing you've begun. If I don't receive them within 48 hours, those copies I may go public. Understand? She nodded, clutching the backpack to her chest. One more thing, I said, turning to leave. Jelani deserves to know who you really are. If you're going to build something with him, build it on truth. Not the fantasy version of yourself you've been performing. I walked away then, through the forest parking lot, past families and joggers and children chasing monkeys. I didn't look back. Behind me I heard her car door open then close. I heard the engine start. I heard her drive away, taking with her the last fragments of a marriage that had died long before I'd picked up that portfolio. 3 days later I received an email. Attached were documents showing Thandai had hired Kipchoge and Associates, one of Nairobi's most respected tax law firms. She'd begun the process of declaring her hidden accounts, restructuring her shell companies, and preparing for a full tax audit. It would cost her millions. It would take years. But she was doing it. The divorce papers arrived 2 weeks after that. Fair terms, no games, no insults disguised as settlements. I signed them in Mzee Omondi's hardware shop, using his desk as a table, while customers argued about the price of nails in the background. I never saw Thandai again. I heard through mutual acquaintances that her tax issues made the newspapers briefly, rising entrepreneur faces audit, but that she'd cooperated fully and avoided criminal charges. I heard she'd ended things with Jelani. I heard she'd sold the Karen house and moved to something smaller. I heard she'd started actually running her businesses instead of just collecting money from them. I hoped it was all true. I hoped she'd found some version of redemption. As for me, I kept teaching. I wrote that novel I'd always talked about, a story about love and loss and the price we pay for compromising ourselves. It didn't make me rich, but it made me whole. And sometimes, late at night, I'd remember the girl under the jacaranda tree, the one who'd loved my poetry and promised forever. I'd mourn her. Not the woman she'd become, but the woman she could have been if she'd remembered that the richest person isn't the one with the most money, but the one who can still look at themselves in the mirror and recognize the face staring back. Now, if this story touched something in your heart, if it made you think about your own choices, your own relationships, your own journey, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button. Not because I'm asking, but because stories like this need to be shared. Real stories about real struggles and real consequences. Stories that make us uncomfortable because they show us truths we'd rather not face.